You know why I use those slogans that are robbing the Canadians in the wrong way? Gestapo, Nazi, KGB. Because I'm doing my best to yell from the rooftops. Wake up, wake up, wake up. I don't know how to wake you up. The government is not your friend anymore. They are lying and deceiving you, so I'm using words that maybe will shake you out of your sleep. You know why I use those slogans that are robbing the Canadians in the wrong way? Gestapo, Nazi, KGB. Because I'm doing my best to yell from the rooftops. Wake up, wake up, wake up. I don't know how to wake you up. The government is not your friend anymore. They are lying and deceiving you, so I'm using words that maybe will shake you out of your sleep. Gestapo is here. Nazis are here, the lawbreakers. You know, you think government is for you, so please explain it to me. How come they enacted mandates and restrictions and regulations and they themselves didn't follow them? If they are honorable people, you know those ministers, we call them honorable so-and-so.
Yeah.
There's no honor left with those people. They're crooks, they're liars, they're cheaters, they're Nazis. So Jason Kenney sends Gestapo to arrest a peaceful pastor in the middle of the highway, and 2 days later he throws a party at the Sky Palace with his cabinet ministers.
But
Drinking and partying, not social distancing, not wearing a mask.
But is Jason Kenney sending them, or is it not the Crown Prosecutor?
But you see, here's what we observed for the past 2.5 years. Nothing is being done without the politicians pushing it first. Think about it. Everything was always coming from the politicians. They appointed the health chiefs. They gave that authority to those people,
Right.
unelected officials. It's coming from the government. It's Jason Kenney and others like him that goes on television and says, yeah, you are to obey the health mandates because those people tell us that we are to obey them. And yet, at the same time, a few minutes later, he goes to a restaurant ignoring everything he subjected us to.
Okay, so the response to that for a lot of people is that, okay, but Jason Kenney was out on a terrace and there was social distancing between them. But
No, it wasn't.
Are you saying it's not?
Of course, look at the pictures. Actually, I'll tell you more. Here is a Minister of Environment, Jason Nixon. Next to him is a Minister of Health, Tyler Shandro. That's the very man that sent the AHS Gestapo to hunt us down, to shut down our restaurants, our businesses, and our churches. That's the very man that sent those people to do this to us, while at the same time, he is not wearing a muzzle, he is not social distancing, he's sitting next. He was sitting closer than we are sitting right now. Pictures don't lie. I mean, you can manipulate them, but those were the true pictures. And later on, Jason Kenney said it on the record, yeah, we made a mistake. That's not good enough. You've just arrested pastors for the crime you yourself committed, and you're off the hook and you think, I'm sorry is good enough? Why is not Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, charged with a crime like I was? Why Shandro is not charged with a crime that he charged me with? You know, Shandro has become a Minister of Justice. He's a Solicitor General for the province of Alberta right now. In other words, I'm looking at this like he was a good Nazi as a Minister of Health, so he was rewarded with the highest position in the land. Travis Taves, he was also there. He was a Minister of Finance. He's running for the UCP, United Conservative Party leadership. He wants to become our next premier. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, Canadians, why would you replace one snake with a viper? They're all the same. What we need grassroots, I call them faceless, nameless nobodies, to run for office, not professional politicians. I'm sick and tired of professional politicians that are doing this as their career. What we need is a mother or a father or a grandpa that sees his country in turmoil, sees this level of corruption and says, we got to do something about this. We need to bring sanity back to our beloved Canada. A history lesson. Do you know, and I'm sure you do, why Canada was formed?
Mm-hmm.
It was because of persecution.
Well, it was also because of the Civil War in the United States was a big major political factor.
But you know, I'm referring not just Canada as a nation, but the New World, which includes
yes.
the United States of America as well.
Yeah.
You know, this land that we call home right now was created for one purpose. The people like you and me were hunted down by the establishment, by the kings, by the monarchs, by the crooks of their time in England, in France, and all over the Europe. Some were burned on the stakes. I'm sure I would be burned on the stake as a heretic by some people because I'm a pastor. So those types of people decided, okay, let's pack our bags and let's go to this place and let's start a new world, a world without persecution, a world when a man can work hard and achieve something beautiful, a man that can work hard and build a house for his children and his grandchildren. Is that not why we came here? I came here for a new world. A world without corruption, a world that I can worship my God, without government, the Nazi government or the communist government or the socialist government telling me how I can and how I cannot worship my God. This is craziness. This is a repetition of history. And if people do not see what's going on, then maybe they need a good slap in the face.
Or maybe they need a good history lesson. Because I don't think the
slap is faster.
Yeah. But as a pastor, you would agree that there shouldn't be violence, right?
Yeah, slap is, you see, I was a lifeguard.
Yeah.
And I remember my training, you know, I remember my teacher constantly telling me, you got to remember, when people are drowning, they want to take you with them. And here is what I'm observing in my beloved Canada. There's many people drowning and they want to take me and you and others like us with them. In order to get their cooperation or in order to slap them out of this panic that they are in the middle of, you sometimes have to slap them in the face. And that's not hate, that's not violence. They're just like, wake up. Like, do you see what's happening? Like, wake up, you know, like, wake up. So it's not really a violence.
Would you say like that the truckers going up to Ottawa would be kind of like a slap?
It was a big slap. It was a beautiful thing. I was interviewed by Glenn Beck.
Oh, yes.
And he caught me by surprise. And I'm glad he did. You know, he interviewed me and I was talking about my experience in prison and all that stuff. And he says, Pastor Artur, do you regret? Do you regret the imprisonment? Do you regret being part of the truck convoy, being arrested and what they did to you, the solitary confinement, threats of violence, inciting inmates to beat me up or to murder me, being taken to the psych ward, max spot, freezing conditions, messed up my back, all those different things. Do you regret being part of this? And I said, absolutely not. This was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in this country. Here's what I saw in Milk River, in Coutts, in Ottawa, during the rallies, here, all over that I have been participating in. Here's what I saw. I saw every color on earth. I saw rich and poor. I saw families and children, young and old, men and women, people speaking all kinds of languages, with all kinds of creeds and backgrounds coming together under one umbrella, freedom, Canadian flag. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I don't regret the moment. If I had to go back to prison just to experience that moment in my life, I'd do it gladly, even though it was no fun to be there. To see Canadians passionate about their country like I've never seen before. To see young people laughing and enjoying the moment with the Freedom Family. I saw people sharing food with each other, cooking, barbecuing, bringing sandwiches to others, water, dragging miles 12 miles, they were dragging water for kids. I've never seen something like this before in my life in this country. I've seen it during Solidarity movement in Poland, but I've never seen it in Canada. As you can tell, I am a patriot. I love my country, even though this country has hurt me so much and took me through a ringer. 16 arrests, over 100 court cases, 340 citations, and now I'm facing multiple criminal charges and trials. I love Canadian flag. I love my country. Because you see, Canadian flag, it doesn't belong to Justin Trudeau. Canadian flag doesn't belong to those crooks in Parliament or at the legislatures. It belongs to me. It belongs to you. This is a symbol of our beloved country. I love this symbol. And that's what I saw during the truck convoy. I saw my beloved country lifted high. I saw people praying with each other. I saw people being humans again, sharing, loving, crying, singing together. This was the most beautiful thing. This was worth every minute of my time in jail. A Crown prosecutor comes to me when I was in a solitary on concrete. I was messed up. I prayed to God. I said, God, take me out of this place. They're going to kill me here. And Crown prosecutor comes, this crooked man, this lying, deceiving man. He comes and says, you can go home. You can be free. You can be free if you plead guilty to mischief. And all the other charges, everything else we will remove. You will be a free man again. Just plead guilty to one little one. You see, you know what they wanted? They wanted their front page story. Right. Artur Pawlowski is a criminal. Artur Pawlowski, the pastor, the freedom movement pastor. They called me Canada's pastor in the States and in other places. He agrees. He was a villain. He's a lawbreaker. That's what they wanted. Because you see, we have become a symbol. Our little stand, feeding the poor and opening the church and loving people, just being Canadians. What they do is un-Canadian. What I do is Canadian. Just being a good neighbor. You want to wear a mask? Be my guest. Not once I kicked anyone. If that anyone would come fearful or protected, fine. Wear 3. If that's what works for you, that's okay. You're protected then.
But the people would say, yeah, but Pastor, I mean, wearing the mask is something that is protecting others. It's your role as a Christian to ensure that, you know, you're not spreading the virus to other people.
Well, if that was the case, then how come all the scientists, biologists, and the doctors that I spent 4 months with disagree with this? A piece of cloth cannot, will not, ever stop a virus that is 1,000 times smaller than the bacteria. It's like telling me that this chain fence outside is going to stop mosquitoes. So how come they are viciously attacking me like the blood-sucking politicians eating me alive here right now? Because that fence didn't stop them from coming. The same way your piece of cloth or this blue medical mask cannot, it's impossible to stop such a small virus. So my question would be this: if this is an impossibility, why do I have to wear one? Because if I knew that this piece of cloth would block or protect or save, I would wear one. I would hate it to wear something like this on my face, because I don't like anything on my face except my beard. But I would wear it because it would make sense. It would be actually scientific. But knowing the truth and knowing that this has nothing to do with keeping anyone safe, because the virus can come in and go out without a problem, then why do I have to wear one? You see, I'm a student of history. And again, I always go back to history. Historically speaking, a muzzle or a mask or anything that covers you except leaving your eyes has one purpose: to show you few things. We're taking your identity away. In other words, we don't care who you are. You're just a social insurance number. It doesn't matter your name, your dream, your plans, all of that is a secondary thing. That's communism, that's socialism. It's only collective that matters. An individual person doesn't matter anymore, unless you're a communist. Because if you're a communist, if you're one of the 50,000, you have houses, you got palaces, you've got money, you've got food, you got chocolates with peanuts in it. You've got everything you want because you're pharaoh. I'm talking about 36 million.
Right.
So the 50,000s are the pharaohs, and then there are the slaves. So this is a symbol of slavery. Your identity goes, but there is more to that. When you put something on your face, when you're covering your mouth, it's a symbol of we don't care what you have to say. We're silencing you. It doesn't matter how you feel, your expression. Are you smiling? Are you crying? It doesn't matter. Your voice means nothing to us. We are taking that voice away from you. And that's history. Africans, African Americans, when they were taken from other countries, from Africa, they were subjected to those metal masks. And that was exactly what they were telling them for those few months until they got to North America. It didn't matter if you were a prince, if your father was the king in your tribe. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. Now you're a slave. You mean nothing. Forget about your name. You're just a number. And then we don't care what you have to say. Your complaints, we don't care about them. Is that not what happened to the truck convoy? Is that not what happened to us on the streets of our cities? They wanted to muzzle us, they wanted to silence us, and they outlawed us trying to reason with the establishment and saying, we're not your slaves. We still have a voice. And they took that voice away from us by the use of propaganda, just like the Soviets did. Remember, there was only one outlet allowed behind the Iron Curtain. It was the communist outlet. No one else was allowed to tell anything to anyone. You were muzzled.
Right.
And the individual human person meant nothing.
So I want to ask you two more questions that come to mind. One is, I'd like to know what happened with respect to this court case where you had a victory there on Friday, dealing with this contempt case. But also, I want to ask you about what it was like in prison. So let's start first of all with the case that just occurred, where the Court of Appeal ordered that AHS had to pay your expenses.
So what happened was, after that famous video Get Out, it has become personal for those politicians. That video was watched over 1 billion times, and it was the #1 played video during the Easter weekend. It was incredible. They invaded our church. I did what I believe every man, every woman was supposed to do during this 2.5 years of tried slavery or tyranny. I just kicked them out. I stood on the law of God, but also on the law of the land. What they were doing was illegal. I showed them the door. They left, but they came back with a vengeance. They found a judge, David Gates, and David Gates of Alberta, the judge here, gave them the power to enter our church anytime they wanted with whomever they wanted to come. And if anyone would dare to stop them, like I did, could be arrested with any means necessary.
So that was the contempt.
So they showed up with a SWAT team, but I kicked them out again. I did not allow them to come in. They came with the paper, I showed them the door. They came back a week later with another judge's order. That name was John Rook. He is a chief associate justice of the province of Alberta, so one of the highest judges in Alberta. And he gave them the power to arrest anyone within the province of Alberta. 4.5 million Albertans were subjected to his order. John Doe and Jane Doe. So they came with that as well. And they opened the door, the SWAT team showed up, dropped that buggy on the ground, and they left. I thought I would be arrested, but I wasn't. They left. I finished my sermon. People went home, and as I was driving back with a friend of mine, with my brother David, we got arrested on a highway. by the SWAT team. They waited for people to go home, and on the way back home, they arrested me. We spent 3 days and 2 nights in prison, on concrete, deprived of sleep, banging on the door, subjected to just stripped naked, like bad stuff.
And were you and your brother together in the cell, or were you?
No, we were in 2 separate cells. Just before they took us to court to see Adam Germain, another crooked judge that found us in contempt ×2 of those 2 orders. Before we were transferred, then we were together in a cell. Until then, we were in 2 separate concrete cells, not allowed to sleep. So finally, we go before the judge, Adam Germain, and I'll never forget what he said. He says, a friend of mine, John Rook, called me and asked me for a personal favor to oversee all of those cases. So you being a lawyer, you understand what that means. His boss is calling him as a friend and is asking him for a favor here. Mr. Germain, can you take care of those people? They've embarrassed us greatly. They dare to show the whole world that you can resist this tyranny. That's unacceptable. We need to make an example out of them. Can you deal with this? What is Adam Germain was to do? That's his boss, and he's doing this as a personal favor to his boss. So I turned to my brother David, I said, that's it, it's over. This trial even didn't start yet, and it's already done. This is a show trial, straight from my childhood, straight from Soviet Russia, straight from behind the Iron Curtain. When you had a person that was arrested and charged with the crime against the state, against the communism, and it didn't matter if he had lawyers, it didn't matter if he had evidence to contrary. It was already done deal before even the trial started. That's a show trial. It's another historical lesson. So Adam Germain ultimately found us guilty.
Of contempt.
Of 2 contempts.
Right.
And because the story was an international story, and I have become a little bit like a hero in the freedom movement, I was in the United States meeting with politicians, congressmen, Trump family, you name it. Americans really loved what I did, and they wanted to support. So the story was becoming even bigger. So the judge decided, instead of sentencing me to prison like the government wanted, he says, if I sentence you to prison, you will become a bigger hero. So instead, he gave me 120 hours of community service, because he decided that what I do for a living, like feeding the poor, that's not community service. So he says, I have to do 120 hours, my brother David and Chris Scott, but not at Street Church. You're not allowed to serve the poor within the organization that you oversee. Also, he penalized us, me and my brother David, with over $50,000 of penalties. So they hammered us with money. Also, he gave us a compelled speech. I don't know if you heard about that.
Right.
This was never, ever done in the history of Canada to an individual. One premier did it to the newspapers, which was a big stink about it, but never done to an individual. Adam Germain decided that he's going to write a script himself, and he's going to order us to read that script every time I preach in a church, every time I do media interviews, every time I talk to another human being, I have to read that script. Just like North Koreans, just like Chinese, just like, straight from the Soviet Russia. Also, he says, I'm not going to throw you in jail because you will become even more famous. So I'm prohibiting you from traveling. So I became, with my brother David, we became prisoners in the province, just like Soviets would do. You're not allowed to travel. Why? Because we say so. Plus, he gave us a probation officer and 18 months probation. So that's what he did. Totally illegal, totally against the Criminal Code of Canada, totally against Constitution, Charter of Rights and Freedoms, everything out the window. And he gave me a compelled speech. So what we did, we had a big rally outside of the courts, and I grabbed the microphone and I said, I guess I'm going to prison, because judge, I'll never obey this order. Never ever I will give a communist script. You try to hire me to become a CBC reporter, CNN reporter. I refuse. I already have a job, and that job is to preach the truth. And you have ordered me to preach a lie. I'll never do it. My brother David said the same thing, and we were waiting to be arrested, but they didn't. Only they came back when I arrived back from the States. I was arrested on the tarmac, stepping out from the plane, arrested, criminally charged for inciting people to come to church, officiating church service, participating in illegal gathering, and not wearing a muzzle. Released on bail, arrested again, coming back from a rally with my wife by RCMP. They arrested me for disturbing peace, for trespassing and not wearing a muzzle. Then I was arrested for breach of probation, criminally charged, because I attended a rally outside of the minister's house. Arrested in the middle of the highway, again thrown in jail. And then I started to support the truck convoy, officiated few church services, fed those people, went to Milk River, did the same thing, give my speech and the church sermon in Quds, and then a few days later I was arrested by RCMP officers, detectives, Calgary police, and undercover Calgary police and RCMP officers. Taken to police custody, interrogated for hours, then taken to a Spy Hill detention center, processed, fingerprinting, you know, solitary confinement, concrete, taken to remand center, stripped naked, deprived of my rights, placed in solitary confinement, at times 26 hours, non-stop, deprived of water, many times deprived of washroom, placed in metal cages multiple times, stripped naked multiple times, threatened. 5 inmates came to me and they said that the guards were inciting them with incentives. They were giving them incentives to beat me up, to murder me in prison. Then 40 days later, in solitary confinement, they kidnapped me from a common area by a lie. The guard comes and says, you have a visitor. You have a visitor. So, okay, I have a visitor. Followed him. There's really not much you can do when you're under their supervision. And sheriffs were waiting for me, and they took me from Calgary Remand Center, where we have lawyers, where my wife, my home, right? And they took me to Remand in Edmonton, hundreds of miles away. And they placed me in a max spot. Max spot is a hell on earth. Freezing conditions, you can't sleep, you can't do nothing. You're like this, non-stop. They cranked the air conditioning.
How long were you there?
So that was, thank God, 30 hours or so, but it was bad. Why I got out of the max spot, they gave me a document which I have. Everything I say, it can be proven. I have a document from Remand. They placed me in a max spot because I was considered dangerous to the staff and dangerous to the facility, to a point that I was not allowed to have a pen because I was considered extremely dangerous. But I'll tell you why. Because I was writing everything I was observing. So I had documents, papers, and I was writing. So they took that away from me. And then the next day, we had a trial for the bail hearing. And I called my lawyer and I said, listen, I'm not going to survive this ordeal. It's so freezing cold. I am alone in a max spot. There's no other inmate here. I am alone. It feels like I am in some kind of a science fiction movie. I'm losing my mind. There's no one to talk to. Guards are talking to you on the intercom. This is bad. I'm already 40-some days in isolation, and I'm not doing good. I'm really not doing good. So I said, if you don't tell this to the judge, I think they're going to finish me off here. So she did. And the judge listened to what is happening to me and is scared the directors of the Remand Center. So the next day after the bail hearing, they moved me to a psych ward where I was not examined by the doctors. There was no evaluation. The AHS didn't even know that I was being transferred to a psych ward. And I was placed in a cell with a young fella that slashed his own brother with a machete. And when I walked in, he had pens and pencils and books and all kinds of papers. And I'm looking at this like, I'm not allowed to have a pen because I'm considered extremely dangerous. But you've got all kinds of pens and pencils. And he said, oh, take mine. And he gave me his pen. And I'm thinking to myself, this is like a matrix. Mm-hmm. You can't make this stuff up. This is crazy things. And of course, growing up behind the Iron Curtain, I've heard about those things. I was a kid, so I was never arrested in Poland. I was never subjected to a communism, torture or beating or solitary or stuff like this. I was just a kid. But I've heard about this. I've seen it, that older people were telling me what was going on in the police custody, how they were beating you with the phone books, how they were torturing people, using all kinds of techniques that would not show on your face. I would never ever imagine that this can happen to a Canadian. More, I would never imagine that this can happen to a pastor. And for what? A pastor that did his job. What is my job? My job is to give hope, keep the church open, feed the poor. That's my job. That's why I am a pastor. You're not a pastor so you can do a Zoom fancy preaching. That's not what being a pastor is. Being a pastor is laying hands on the sick, crying with those that just lost a loved one, visiting people in the hospitals, in prison, inviting them and spending time with them while they're telling your story and crying because they're depressed, suicidal, because they're hooked on drugs and alcohol. How can I do that on a Zoom? There's no way. They effectively wanted to take my job away from me. And I just said, no, you have no right to do that. You have no right to steal what God has given to me and what is protected under the Criminal Code of Canada and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I stood to my conviction, and I was threatened, I was hammered, I was ticketed. During the COVID, 5 arrests, over 40 tickets. But I stood strong, and at times I've lost hope in a justice system. I've never lost hope in God. God was holding me strong, but I've lost hope in justice system. I said, how can we talk about civilized country? How we can proceed from now if those people that we have entrusted to serve us and to protect us are now the villains? When the officer shows up with the total disregard to his oath, when a judge disregards law and order and rules based on a political platform, what happened to reporters reporting news? They're no longer reporting news, they're cooks, they're cooking stories, they're making stuff up, whatever the politicians are telling them. So I was saddened by what was going on. But Friday, when I received that phone call from my lawyer, Sarah Miller, I asked her multiple times. I had to ask her a few times, is it total vindication? I mean, like everything, just gone? Total victory, like 100%? And I kept asking. I could not believe it. Yeah, everything. And my brother David too, everything. Like the whole thing. The judges said what it was done to you guys was illegal. It was wrong. It was fundamentally wrong. Against the, actually they used the words, if I remember correctly, they said against the natural law. That's what they used.
So the very concepts that you were using and that you have referred to, you're saying the judges referred to.
And it was like a total, total turnaround. Or, the very place that we started this fight, it came back. But this time, from the mouth of the 3-panel judges. And surprise, surprise, the mainstream media did a very good job reporting on this case, which I was totally shocked. So I was shocked twice, actually 3 times, because some politicians said, oh, we were very disturbed about this from the very beginning. We were upset when this was happening, and we always knew it's wrong. So, yahoo! Good for the Supreme Court,
or
of
the
this land.
Court of Appeal.
Yeah, but this is the highest court in Alberta,
Yeah, that's right.
to do the right thing. And I read that and I said, oh, you snakes, you did this to me.
Well, they never acknowledged any of that while the matter was before.
That's
the
right.
courts, yeah.
That's right. I actually met with one of them personally, Travis Taves. I met with him about a month ago. And it was so funny. I mean, tragically funny. He looks into my eyes. He thought I'm going to be yelling and screaming, Nazi, Gestapo, No, I just wanted to talk to a man, like man to a man. I asked him, why did you do this to me? I'm not a violent man. I'm not a criminal. I love people. I don't even hate my enemies. I pity my enemies. I pity you for what you have done to me. Because one day you're going to face a judge of judges, the one that doesn't take any bribes. You will face my God for what you have done to me. So I pity you. But why did you do this? I'm not a bad person. I'm feeding thousands of people, your people, that you are supposed to feed. And I'm not charging you a penny. Why did you do this to me? And he looked at me and he realized, okay, I'm not going to jump on him and scream and yell. And he put his fist into his chest and banged it a few times. He said, in behalf of Albertans, I apologize to what happened to you. It was wrong.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, but that's not good enough. You gotta call a media, call all of the TVs and all the newspapers and tell that to them when the cameras are rolling. Tell them that this government acknowledges the wrong you have done to me. And he says, no, I cannot do that. I cannot do that. And now he's running to be a leader, a premier of Alberta. So here, and I will just show it to you so you can read it. Whose name is there?
Yeah, Travis Taves.
Travis Taves made this yesterday, I believe it was. I took a snapshot of this, and here's what he says. And again, for those that do not know who this man is, he is the government minister. I mean, he stepped to become the premier. He's the very man that partied with his other minister friends and Jason Kenney, the premier, at the Sky Palace, breaking the same rules, mandates, regulations that we did, in quote. He is the man that part of government started this persecution of shutting down our churches, arresting pastors, fencing the churches. Like, that's the man. This is the government we're talking about. Here's what he writes after the decision from those three judges. Freedom of expression and religion are cornerstones of our society. The arrest of pastors and forced closure of churches during the pandemic were deeply troubling to me. I am thankful to our Court of Appeal for their sound judgment on these matters. And I'm thinking, can you believe this guy? Like, seriously? Now? 2.5 years of tyranny, 5 arrests, 40 tickets, hunted like an animal, surrounded by authorities, undercover RCMP invaded in our churches, which were historically places of sanctuary. We used to call them places of sanctuary. Right. When historically, for thousands of years, you knew that the government will not dare to do that. That was a safe place, peaceful place. Historically, in the Middle Ages, they had to leave their swords outside, but they walked to the guns, they walked to the uniforms. They didn't care. They're the new Nazis. They're the new Gestapo of today. That's the guy. That's the very man with his bodies that did this to me. And now suddenly, because the Court of Appeal vindicated me, my brother David and Chris Scott, and we are innocent, and the court said everything they did was illegal. Now he comes out and says, like, I was cheering for you all this time. Like, what the level of hypocrisy those snakes have. Unbelievable. So, we need to change to those people. We need to elect good, godly, patriotic, lovers of Canada, lovers of freedom, lovers of democracy, people that will that will pass the legacy that was given to us. Is that not why we came here? We came here because some founding fathers, our forefathers, decided that Canada will be different than Europe. The Canada will be different than North Korea. The Canada will be different than Soviet Russia. The Canada will be different than Saudi Arabia. That here we will be governed by a rule of law. Is not the preamble to our Constitution, to Charter of Rights and Freedom says the whereas Canada acknowledges the supremacy of God, whereas Canada acknowledges the supremacy of God, and when you have God, you have the rule of law. When you kick God and his representatives out of your nation, there goes your rule of law. Then it's lawlessness. Then you've got Jason Kenney, Justin Trudeau doing whatever it pleases them. And when you challenge them, when you wanna corner them so you can get an answer, they're nowhere to be found. They're nowhere to be found. You can't meet a politician these days unless there's election, because they're like prostitutes. They go to bed with whomever will give them the voice, the vote. We are in a big trouble in this country. However, this decision from the judges is restoring some hope in my heart, and the way the media portrayed this decision shows me that either they're afraid that the tides are turning, or they realized we can't keep lying any longer.
You know, that was one of the questions I had, was whether or not that decision actually restores your hope in the administration of justice.
Little bit. I'm not fully convinced.
I mean, you still got you got hundreds of cases yet.
No, I got
hundreds of
No, I dealt with over 330 tickets, I think, already. They're done. Some were thrown out. I'm still dealing with multiple cases, multiple arrests, and multiple trials as we speak. For example, I was charged with a $100,000 ticket for feeding the homeless during 2020. So during 2020, police showed up. Remember, I told you there was over 100 police officers, 52 police cars, SWAT team, and a chief of police. Well, for that, I was charged with a $100,000 ticket. I got 15 tickets for that day, but one of them is still in a court, and we had 3 days trial, and it's still in a court.
So, in other words, the court hasn't made a decision yet.
That's right.
Okay.
Also, I am facing the terrorism charge, the interfering with the crucial infrastructure under the Defense Act. As the first Canadian ever charged in the history of Canada with that offense, I'm still facing this. That's why I spent, as an innocent man, because the notion of innocent until proven guilty, in my case, was completely thrown out of window. I was subjected already to imprisonment, even though I have not been proven guilty yet of any offense. So that's ahead of me. As we are sitting right now and enjoying this time, do you know that in just few minutes, it's 6:42, in just few minutes, I will not be able to go and shake your hand outside of my property. I'm still on house arrest. From 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., I am on house arrest, and if I would dare to come out to your car to say farewell, I would be arrested and charged for breaching the release conditions. Also, I am still subjected to other bail conditions, including assurities and a big monetary bond that I had to give up to the courts. Also, I am not allowed to go and feed the homeless people in my church. Can you imagine a judge saying, no, you can't. You can't go and feed the poor. So I have a team, my brother, my wife, now she's in the States with my son, but I have a huge support group. We have hundreds of volunteers. So the feeding of the poor continues regardless if I'm here or not, which I'm very proud of, that if something would happen to me or if I would disappear, the work will continue.
Right.
If I am in prison, the work continues. If my associate pastor would be arrested, which he was, work will continue, because there's hundreds of others that gladly will take our place.
Okay. So, one of the things that I hear you say here, as a result of losing your charitable status, and because that's been an issue that I've had with a lot of things in the last while, because I see that as a bludgeon, as it were, that government is using to control the charities. And you mentioned that there's a lot of people who do not give to your organization. You're finding it a struggle financially yourself. And as you pointed out, your own house desperately needs a shingle job. And so what is it that you feel? What would you say to Canadians? You need help. You need help to continue feeding. As you said, it's continuing, but how are you doing personally?
Well, we have needs, and you can you can be the witness yourself. Go outside and see our vehicles. When I was in prison, Crown prosecutor portrayed me to the judge as a great villain, manipulator, and a person that uses people for his personal benefits. And here is how he spun the story. Mr. Pawlowski goes in his luxury vehicle, stirs trouble for the good people of Alberta in Milk River and in Coutts, incites people to commit acts of violence. And of course, if you listen to my speech 3 times during my speech, I said peacefully, no guns, no swords. This is not a violent revolution. This is a peaceful non-compliance. Just say no to the tyranny. They are using horses against people. They're using guns against people. They're using violence against people. We're not violent people. And then he goes back into his luxury vehicle and drives away, leaving people behind. So that's how he spun the story. That luxury vehicle he was referring to is my $6,500 worth car of my son. I drive 2007 Dodge Caravan with holes all over the place, like 300,000 kilometers. And I still have a truck from my business time, 2001 Dodge Ram, and you can see my luxury vehicles outside. But that was a good spin for the media, and guess what the mainstream media did? They ran that story, that I am using this situation to raise millions of dollars for myself so I can have luxury vehicles and stuff like this. They're liars, they're propaganda machinery. You can see yourself in what kind of luxury we're living. We're not complaining. I'm not complaining. I love my little house. I love what God has given to me. I'm not thirsty, put it this way, for the palaces and the fancy houses that I used to build. Yeah, it would be good to have a good car. It would be good to live in a bigger house. Of course, I'm no different than you. If God would drop $10 million on my lap, of course I would buy a good car, and I would probably buy a better house, a bigger house, because it's very hard, 5 people living in 900 square feet house, you know, according to Canadian standards, is sometimes a little bit challenging, put it this way. If it comes to finances, when I walked from the business, I truly did that. I walked from my business. I walked from the money. I walked from that lifestyle, totally relying on God. So what I'm trying to say is, whatever God wants me to have, I'm content with that. If He will give me millions so I can build a church or get a farm so we can raise our own food to feed the homeless, I'll say, praise Jesus, thank you. If He will choose not to, I'll say, praise Jesus, thank you. At least I'm healthy, my family is healthy, my kids are healthy. He saved my son. Remember, he's 22 years old. He just met with the Trump Jr. yesterday. He sent me pictures and video. He met with Ted Cruz. He saw Donald Trump. He hung around with some amazing people. I'm very grateful that my young son that was supposed to be dead is cruising around the United States of America, finding his own path as the lion to be that God wants to create in him. So yes, the government hurt me enormously. Financially, they almost bankrupt me. They sent me a foreclosure notice for my house. And I remember at that time I complained to God. I said, God, you're a terrible boss. You know, it's me. He has to deal with me. He created me. I'm very upfront with people, but also with him. I said, God, you're a terrible God. You're a terrible boss. I used to hire hundreds of people. They work for me. And I was a good boss. I would bring people coffee. I'll take them for dinners. I would even take them horseback riding. I'll take them paintballing at the end of the season. I would give them bonuses, and I would always pay them every month. Sometimes every 2 weeks, they would get their check. No matter what, even if I didn't make any money, they got their money. And I said, God, I'm working for you for years, and instead of getting more, like any normal person, I'm having less and less and less. I'm losing. This is not a good partnership. I was supposed to gaining something, and I'm losing. And you owe me in back salary for years. You're a terrible boss. And I love my God. He has a sense of humor. And he did not rebuke me. He did not spank me. He's like a loving father. He says, well, because you don't see the end yet, son. Did they take your house away? He said to me. I said, no, but they want to. Did they take your house away? I said, no, but, you know, we always bring this but. Did they take your house away? And I said, no. Well, then I'm not late, am I? I said, technically speaking, you're not. The next day, I got the check to pay every tax that I own to the city of Calgary and my personal taxes. Everything that they were using against me, trying to take my home, the little house that was left over from my empire, God paid it the next day. And that taught me a powerful lesson. No matter what is happening, if your life is with God, everything is happening to you is for His glory and for your benefit, even if it feels opposite. So me being in prison, me being stripped naked, subjected to cruelty and accused falsely and betrayed and all different things, if my life is with God, all of those things that was done to me has a purpose and will have a benefit in the future. So if people want to support what I do, be my guest. Go to streetchurch.ca. There is a donate button. It's not hidden. You can easily find it. You can send an e-transfer, ART at streetchurch.ca. I'll take every donation. And I'm telling you, every donation is going to be put to a good use. But am I going to go out there and prostitute myself to get donations? I refuse. My God is bigger than all the people on this earth. And if He wants me to have silver and gold, He owns it. He's going to give it to me. Also, having a charitable status, Christians and church leaders, you have to realize this simple truth that they're using this as a leash. What they effectively did to us by this charitable tax status, these exemptions or those incentives, if you will, they muzzled us and they are keeping us on a short leash. If you say anything about abortion, well, is that politics? Abortion is politics? Since when? In the Bible it says, thou shalt not murder. It's not politics. That's the law of God. But they're saying, if you say, we're going to start pulling, we are having you on a leash. If you say anything about homosexuality, which we consider politics, we're going to take that away from you. If you're going to say about divorce, well, divorce is not politics. Divorce, God says, I hate divorce. It's His business, it's His kingdom, it's His commandments, His law. But they're using this against us. So now I'm thinking to myself, and this will sound terrible for the establishment, but I'll say it anyway. I wish that the government would took the charitable status from the churches sooner rather than later. I'll tell you why. Because that would trigger their uprising. And finally, the pastors and the churches and the clerics would rise up and start doing what we are commanded to do, which is always preach the truth no matter what the consequences. Always to do the right thing, no matter if we get incentives or if we don't get them. I think it would bring order back to the church. Book of Acts, Is that not what we refer to?
The what?
The book of Acts,
The book of Acts, yes.
right? We go back to the book of Acts and we are looking at how the church looked at the formation of that church.
In the early Christian centuries. Yeah.
There were no incentives from the government that day. People were giving because they were giving it to God. And they understood that God is the one that will repay them, not man. That's why I don't look at men to repay me. When I feed the poor, when I invite people, when I give, I forget about it. God is the one that will repay me. The Bible says when you give to the poor, you're lending to God. Do you know that in the Bible that's the only scripture that says you own, that God owns you something?
Right.
This is the only scripture that God is saying to you and me, I owe you, my son, when you go and you give it to the poor. Also, there's another scripture that says when you throw a bread upon the waters, after many days, we would like to have American style way, right? Fast food Christianity. I put a toonie and I get the chocolate bar. We go to church, we want immediate gratification for what we have done.
Right.
But the Bible says after many days. That means sometimes there will be a need of time. I'm waiting 17 years for my vindication. David was waiting 13 years to become the king. Joseph was waiting 13 years, falsely accused of a rape, enslaved by his own family, end up in jail, 13 years of an ordeal, waiting for God to vindicate him. I'm waiting 17 years, and you know what? If I would never see the vindication during this side of eternity, that's okay with me. Because I know that one day God is going to reward me for everything I have done, for everything you have said, for everything you have done. One day you will be rewarded for that, either with the punishment or with the benefits. There's a crown of life waiting for all of us. That's why I do what I do. And again, I would not be able to do this without my wife and my family. This would be an impossible task. My wife, outside of God, of course, God is the strong tower. He is the foundation of my faith. He is the shield. He's everything. But He has given me a strong woman that is like an anchor. Every time I shift, every time I go to the left or to the right, she reminds me why we do what we do.
Right.
Are you doing this to please the governor, or are you doing this to please God? Do I feed people because I want the governor to see my good deeds, or I do this because God commands me to do that? Why did I keep the church open against the governor's wishes? Because God told me to keep the church open. It says, do not. You know what do not means? I'm a Polish immigrant. I mean, I have to digest English words.
Yeah.
But do not, to me, means do not forsake the gatherings of the saints. Feed the poor. What that means? Go and feed the poor. But the governor says, I cannot. It doesn't matter what the man says. I am telling you. When I said yes to Jesus, I said no to Satan and his minions. When I said yes to Jesus, my life is no longer mine. It belongs to Him. I'll tell you, I don't understand pastors anymore. I do not understand clergymen anymore. I do not understand why would you sell Jesus for a bowl of soup, for incentives, like Esau did. Selling your inheritance for an incentive, for an immediate gratification, for the bonuses from the government, for the COVID bonuses. Millions of dollars were given to the pastors, you know that. Millions upon millions of dollars were given to the churches that complied. I do not understand people that are willing to sell Jesus for 30 shekels of silver like Judas. My Jesus is worth a lot more than 30 shekels of silver. My Jesus is worth more than all the gold and all the silver and all the diamonds combined together. Who created all of that stuff? And how long do we have? You got gray hair. I have less and less hair. Gray all over. How long do we have?
It's not very long.
I do think about that stuff. You know, you
Yeah.
reach a certain age and you look in the mirror and like, oh my God, gray everywhere now. Like, how that happened? I was just a young kid traveling, escaping communism on a boat through Istanbul, Turkey, straight to Athens, Piraeus, and then to Canada. That was just a few days ago. So how long do I have? 10 years, a day, a minute, 50 years? Only God knows how long do we have. And one day I'm going to face him face to face. And you know, one last thing I want to say. One day I'm going to sit with Apostle Peter. You know that? I'm going to sit with David. I'm going to sit with Esther and Deborah and Mordecai and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego and Daniel. And we're going to have a party together, and we're going to be sipping the best coffee ever with cream, and it will be sweetest thing that you've ever tasted. And we're going to be listening to their exploits. And Peter is going to tell me about how he felt when they were doing this to him. And Peter, how it felt when they were crucifying you upside down. Peter, how it felt when they were hammering you left and right. Daniel, how it felt when God shut all those mouth of those lions. Shadrach, how it was when you were in the middle of that fire. That was a crazy thing. Esther, how it felt when you went against the law of the land to see the king. And you said, if I perish, I perish. Mordecai, why you didn't bow before Haman? The only thing he wanted you to bow. Meshach, why you didn't bow before the golden statue? It would be over for you. You would not face these difficulties. You know how it felt when the man was saying something contrary to the law of God. Can you tell me? Can you tell me your exploits? And when I'm going to spend thousands upon thousands of years listening to their story, I'm betting that they're going to turn at least sometime, one day, to me, and they will say, Art, what's your story? What did you do for the kingdom of God? How much did you suffer? And what happened to you? I didn't do anything. I just attended faithfully a church for 50 years. I was tithing. That's your story? That's your story? Seriously? I hope that that's not your story. My story, a story of Artur Pawlowski, is I did my best. Sometimes I made mistakes, sometimes I did great, I think. But I did my best under the circumstances. And I have a story. I have many stories that I can share of my suffering for the kingdom of God, and my exploits, and leading thousands of people to the Lord, baptizing them week after week. I have a story, feeding countless people on many continents and in different countries. I have a story. I said no to Nebuchadnezzar. I said no to the golden image. I said no to Hamans of today. I did my best. That's my story.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I greatly appreciate it, and it's a powerful story, and it's one that, of course, will upset a lot of people's sensibilities in this country, who are not used to someone speaking so plain, but also it just helps explain, I think, our moment, and an individual like you who is so motivated by your faith. I want to thank you so very much for tuning in to our Freedom Feature podcast. Today we had Pastor Artur Pawlowski, and it was an eye-opening conversation, and I think you would agree. But you know, some of you may not agree with what Pastor Pawlowski says. You may not agree with what I say, but that's the whole point. We're here to open dialogue, to have honest, transparent discussion about the issues of our time. So I hope that you stay tuned until next time, and I'm your host, Barry Bussey. The fight for freedom consists not only in the legal battles in court, but also in the battle of ideas at the universities and in the media. It takes time, effort, and money to keep on top of the debates for freedom. Your donation allows us to keep fighting for all Canadians by giving at firstfreedoms.ca.